The space station floated in the darkness between stars. It was old and gray and very large. Thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds passed through its corridors every day. Some were traders. Some were travelers. Many were refugees, running from wars and disasters that had destroyed their homes. Ward 7C was in the quietest part of the station. It was a place for children who had lost everything. The walls were white and the lights were soft, and the air always smelled clean. Machines hummed day and night, monitoring temperatures and oxygen levels, and 100 other things that kept living beings alive. In the corner of Ward 7C, 12 small creatures huddled together in a pile of fur and fear. They were Vorath cubs. They looked like wolf pups, but their fur was silver like moonlight, and their eyes were the color of amber. Their ears were large and triangular, and they moved constantly, tracking every sound in the room. The cubs had arrived on the station 9 days ago. Their colony ship, the Starward Promise, had limped into dock with emergency lights flashing and hull plates missing. Something terrible had happened during their journey. A section of the ship had broken open, and all the air had rushed out into space. Every adult Vorath on the ship had died. Only the cubs survived because they had been sleeping in the deepest part of the vessel. In a section that kept it sealed, station workers had found them still in their sleeping pods, crying for parents who would never answer. Now the cubs sat together and did not move. They did not play. They did not explore their new home. They simply pressed against each other and stared at the walls with empty eyes. Administrator Catherine watched them through the observation window. She was a Zalari, tall and thin with skin like polished brown shell. Her eyes were large and made of many small parts that could see in every direction at once. She had managed Ward 7C for 37 years, and she had seen much suffering. But this case troubled her in ways she could not explain. "Report," she said to the assistant beside her. "The cubs have not eaten in 6 days," the assistant replied. He was also Shalari, younger than Catherine, with a voice that held no emotion. "The automated feeding system has offered 847 different nutritional compounds. All were rejected. Medical status? No illness detected. No parasites. No allergies. Their bodies are healthy but hungry. They simply will not eat." Catherine clicked her mandibles together. This was a sign of frustration among her people. "The compounds are correct? The temperature? The texture? All within optimal parameters for Vorath biology. We have consulted the species database extensively. The food we offer should be perfect for them." Through the window, Catherine watched as a small platform rose from the floor inside the ward. On top of it sat a bowl filled with pale blue paste. This was the latest offering from the automated system. It contained every nutrient a growing Vorath cub needed. It was the exact temperature that Vorath preferred. It even had a flavor that the database said Vorath found pleasant. The smallest cub lifted her head. Her nose twitched as she smelled the offering. She crawled away from the group and approached the bowl slowly. The other cubs watched her with dull eyes. The small cub sniffed the blue paste for a long moment. Then she turned away and crawled back to her siblings. She pressed her face into the fur of the cub beside her and did not move again. Catherine watched this with growing concern. 6 days without food was dangerous for young Vorath. Their bodies needed energy to grow. Without it, they would weaken. Their organs would begin to fail. In perhaps 4 more days, the first cub would die. "Perhaps they wish to die," the assistant said quietly. "Perhaps the loss of their pack has broken something inside them that cannot be repaired." "Cubs do not wish to die," Catherine replied firmly. "They wish to live. That is the nature of young things. We are missing something. There is a piece of this puzzle that we cannot see." She turned away from the window and walked down the corridor. Her footsteps clicked against the metal floor. She needed to find a solution before it was too late. The next morning brought a new staff member to Ward 7C. Her name was Elena Vasquez, and she was human. She was not tall by galactic standards. Her skin was brown and warm, and her hair was black and pulled back from her face. Her eyes were dark and kind, and they noticed things that other eyes often missed. Elena had worked in the station's medical bay for 2 years. She was good at her job, but nothing special. She followed procedures and filled out reports and helped beings from many worlds recover from injuries and illness. The Shalari administrators had transferred her to Ward 7C because humans had a strange reputation in the galaxy. Humans were not the smartest species. They were not the strongest or the fastest. They did not have the best technology or the longest history. But somehow, humans had a talent for solving problems that other species could not solve. They saw things differently. They asked questions that seemed foolish until the answers changed. Everything, Catherine hoped this human might see something in the Varth cubs that the Shalari had. Miss Elena entered Ward 7C quietly. The door slid shut behind her, and she stood very still, letting her eyes adjust to the soft light. The 12 cubs were in their usual pile in the corner. Their ears turned toward her, but their eyes did not open. She did not approach them. Instead, she sat down on the floor near the door and simply watched. The ward was very clean. The walls were smooth and white. The air was the perfect temperature. Every few hours, a platform would rise from the floor with a bowl of nutrient paste. The paste was always the right color and the right texture and the right temperature. It was efficient and precise and completely without soul. Elena sat there for 6 hours. She watched the cubs huddle together. She watched them ignore the food that the machines offered. She watched the smallest cub sometimes lift her head and sniff the air, as if searching for something that was not there. When her shift ended, Elena returned to her quarters and could not sleep. She kept seeing those amber eyes, empty and waiting. She kept thinking about the colony ship and the parents who had died and the children who had survived. She requested the manifest of the Starward Promise from the station database. It arrived on her screen in the middle of the night, and she read it until her eyes burned. The Vorath of the Starward Promise had been farmers. They were traveling to a new world to grow crops and raise animals and build homes. They were simple people who valued simple things: family, community, hard work, love. There was a section in the manifest about their daily routines. Elena read it 3 times. The Vorath ate their meals together, always. The eldest members of the pack prepared the food while the youngest watched and learned. They sat in circles and shared from common bowls. While they ate, the elders told stories about their ancestors and their homeworld and the adventures they would have on their new planet. For the Vorath, eating was not just about filling their bellies. It was about being together. It was about love made visible. It was about family. Elena closed the manifest and stared at the ceiling of her small room. The station's machines could make perfect food. They could measure every nutrient and control every variable. But they could not make love. They could not make family. They could not make the thing that the cubs were truly hungry for. She knew what she needed to do. Elena returned to Ward 7C the next morning with a small bag over her shoulder. Inside the bag was a blanket, a book, and a container of water. She planned to stay for a long time. The cubs were in the same position as before. They had not moved during the night. Their silver fur was dull, and their breathing was slow. The smallest cub looked thinner than she had the day before. Elena sat down in the same spot near the door. She spread the blanket on the floor and made herself comfortable. Then she opened her book and began to read. She did not try to approach the cubs. She did not speak to them or call to them or offer them food. She simply existed in the same space as them, quiet and patient and calm. Hours passed. The automated feeding system offered its bowls of paste at regular intervals. The cubs ignored them. Elena kept reading her book. Sometimes she would look up and find amber eyes watching her. The cubs were curious despite their grief. Humans were rare on this station, and they had probably never seen one before. Elena would meet their gaze for a moment, then return to her book without making any sudden movements. On the third day of her observation, the smallest cub uncurled from the pile and took a few steps toward Elena. Her legs were shaky from hunger and lack of use. She stopped halfway across the room and sat down, watching the human with intense focus. Elena did not react. She turned a page in her book and kept reading. The small cub stayed in that spot for an hour. Then she returned to her siblings and pressed against them once more. Administrator Catherine called Elena to her office that evening. The Solari sat behind a desk covered in glowing screens and data displays. Her compound eyes reflected the light in strange patterns. "You have been observing the cubs for 3 days," Catherine said. "Have you learned anything useful?" Elena sat in the chair across from the desk. It was designed for larger beings, and her feet did not quite reach the floor. "I think I understand the problem," she said. "Explain." "The cubs are not refusing food because they are sick or because they want to die. They are refusing food because the food means nothing to them." Catherine's mandibles clicked. "I do not understand. Food is nutrition. Nutrition is survival. The meaning is obvious." "Not for the Varath," Elena said. She leaned forward in her chair. "I read about their culture. For them, food is more than just something that fills the stomach. The act of preparing food and sharing it together is how they show love. Their word for meal is the same as their word for love made visible." Catherine processed this information. "You are saying that the emotional context of food is important to them." "I am saying that for Varath cubs, there is no difference between food and love. When their elders prepared meals for them, they were not just providing nutrition. They were saying, we care about you and you belong to us and you are safe." The cubs understood this without thinking about it. It was simply how their world worked. Elena gestured toward the ward. "Now their elders are dead. Their parents are dead. Everyone who ever made food for them is gone. And the machines offer them bowls of perfect paste that have no love in them at all. The cubs smell it and they know something is missing. They cannot eat it because eating it would mean accepting that love is gone forever." Catherine was silent for a long moment. Her compound eyes shifted and flickered as she thought. "This is a fascinating theory," she finally said. "But I am not certain how it helps us. We cannot bring their parents back. We cannot manufacture love. The machines can only provide nutrition. The machines cannot provide love," Elena agreed. "But I can." Catherine tilted her head. This was a gesture she had learned from working with many different species. "What do you propose?" "Let me cook for them." "Cook?" "Prepare food by hand, the way their elders would have done. The way my grandmother did for me when I was a child." Elena's voice grew soft as old memories surfaced. "When I was young and sad, my grandmother would make soup. She would stand in the kitchen for hours, chopping vegetables and stirring pots and adding spices by instinct rather than measurement. The soup was never perfect by any scientific standard, but it tasted like love. It tasted like someone cared enough to spend their time making something just for me." Catherine considered this proposal. "Manual food preparation is inefficient. It takes much longer than automated systems. The nutritional content cannot be precisely controlled." "Yes," Elena said. "That is the point. I do not understand how inefficiency helps the cubs." Elena smiled. It was a patient smile, the kind teachers give to students who are learning something difficult. The inefficiency is the love. When someone spends hours making food for you, they are giving you their time. their attention, their care. These things cannot be measured by machines, that they can be felt by hearts. Catherine's mandibles clicked again, faster this time. She was struggling to understand a concept that her logical mind found absurd. Food was molecules. Time was a resource to be optimized. How could wasting time improve the quality of molecules? But the Shallari had managed this ward for 37 years. She had seen many strange things. She had learned that different species had different needs, and sometimes those needs made no sense to outsiders. "There's a kitchen facility on level 7, she said at last. It has not been used in many years. It was installed for species with unusual dietary requirements. You may use it." Elena's face lit up with relief and hope. "Thank you, Administrator. I am authorizing this as an experimental treatment protocol. You will document everything. If the cubs do not begin eating within 3 days, we will need to consider other options." Elena nodded. She knew what other options meant. Feeding tubes, sedation, forcing nutrition into bodies that did not want it. She would not let it come to that. "I understand," she said. 3 days. She left the administrator's office and went directly to level 7. The kitchen was exactly as Catherine had described. Old, dusty, forgotten. The equipment was covered in sheets and the surfaces were gray with neglect. Elena spent the rest of that night cleaning. She wiped down counters and scrubbed pots and tested burners that had not been lit in decades. Her arms ached and her back hurt, and she did not stop until everything was ready. Then she went to the station's supply depot and requested ingredients. The clerk, a small furry being with many arms, looked at her request with confusion. Vegetables? Grains? Protein base? These items are available in processed form through the standard dispensers. "I need them unprocessed," Elena said. "Raw, whole." The clerk blinked several times but did not argue. Humans were known to be strange about food. He gathered the items and placed them in a container for her. Elena carried the container back to the kitchen and spread the ingredients across the counter. She had vegetables in many colors. She had grains that needed to be cooked. She had protein that needed to be prepared. None of it was Vorath food. She did not know any Vorath recipes, but she knew human recipes. She knew the soup her grandmother had made. She knew the meals her mother had prepared on cold nights when the family gathered around the table. She knew that love tasted the same in every language, even if the ingredients were different. She began to cook. The smell came first, Dot. It drifted through the corridors of the station like something alive. It was warm and rich and complex. It spoke of kitchens and homes and safety. Beings who had not smelled anything like it in years stopped in the hallways and breathed deeply and wondered where it was coming from. Dot in Ward 7C. 12 pairs of ears stood straight up. The smallest cub lifted her head. Her nose twitched rapidly, pulling in the strange new scent. She had never smelled anything like this before. It was not the clean, precise smell of the automated food. It was messy and layered and somehow alive. She made a small sound in her throat. The other cubs stirred around her. They too had caught the smell. For the first time in many days, something other than grief moved in their eyes. The door to the ward slid open and Elena walked in. She carried a large pot with both hands. Steam rose from under the lid in gentle curls. The smell grew stronger, filling every corner of the room. Behind her, a small cart held bowls and spoons and a ladle. Elena moved slowly. She did not want to frighten the cubs. She walked to the center of the ward and sat down on the floor with her legs crossed. Then she placed the pot in front of her and removed the lid. The soup inside was golden brown. Chunks of vegetables floated in the broth. The surface shimmered with tiny drops of oil. It was not a beautiful soup by any standard. It was rough and imperfect and absolutely real. The cubs watched from their corner. Their ears tracked every sound Elena made. Their noses worked constantly, analyzing this strange offering. Elena did not look at them directly. She had learned that prey species often felt threatened by direct eye contact. Instead, she focused on the soup. She picked up a bowl from the cart and filled it carefully with the ladle. Then she began to eat. She ate slowly, savoring each bite. She made small sounds of pleasure as the warmth spread through her body. She was not performing for the cubs. She was simply enjoying a meal she had spent hours preparing. The smallest cub moved. She crawled away from the pile of her siblings, her belly low to the ground. Her legs trembled with weakness, but she kept moving. She crossed half the distance to Elena and stopped, her amber eyes fixed on the pot. Elena continued eating. She did not acknowledge the cub. She simply existed in her own moment of comfort and warmth. The cub crept closer. She was near enough now that Elena could have reached out and touched her silver fur. Still, Elena did not move. She finished her bowl and set it aside, then filled another. This second bowl she placed on the floor between herself and the cub. Then she returned her attention to her own meal. The cub stared at the bowl. The soup was still steaming, releasing its rich smell into the air between them. The cub's nose was working so hard that her whole head vibrated. Long minutes passed. Elena ate. The cub watched. Neither of them made any sudden movements. Then the cub lowered her head and began to drink. She drank in small, careful sips at first. The soup was warm but not too hot. The flavors were strange but not unpleasant. The vegetables were soft enough for her young teeth to handle. And underneath all of it was something else. Something that had nothing to do with nutrition or temperature or texture. The soup tasted like care. Like someone had spent time making it. Like she mattered enough for another being to stand in a kitchen and stir and taste and adjust until it was right. The cub ate faster. Her small tongue lapped at the bowl with growing urgency. When the soup was gone, she looked up at Elena with eyes that held something other than emptiness. Elena filled the bowl again. From the corner, another cub began to move. Then another. Then another. They crept across the floor like silver shadows, drawn by the smell and the sight of their smallest sister eating. They gathered around Elena and the pot, forming a loose circle of hungry, hopeful faces. Elena filled bowl after bowl. Her hands moved steadily, pouring soup and passing bowls to small paws that reached out to receive them. She did not speak. Words were not needed. The food spoke for her. When the pot was empty, she stood and went back to the kitchen. The cubs made distressed sounds when she left, but she returned quickly with another pot, freshly filled. She sat back down in the center of their circle and continued to serve. By the end of that first meal, all 12 cubs had eaten. Their bellies were round and warm. Their eyes were bright with something that looked like the beginning of hope. They did not return to their corner. Instead, they stayed close to Elena, pressing against her legs and sides, as if afraid she might disappear. The smallest cub crawled into Elena's lap and fell asleep there. Administrator Catherine watched all of this through the observation window. Her compound eyes processed what she was seeing, but her mind struggled to understand it. The nutritional content of the human soup was not special. The temperature was within normal parameters. The ingredients were common items available from any station dispenser, and yet the cubs had eaten. After 6 days of refusing perfect food, they had eaten imperfect soup made by human hands. Catherine reviewed the security footage of Elena preparing the meal. She watched the human chop vegetables by hand instead of using the automated slicer. She watched her stir the pot for hours instead of letting the heating element distribute the temperature evenly. She watched her taste the soup again and again, adding small amounts of seasoning until it met some internal standard that no machine could measure. It was inefficient. It was wasteful. It was completely illogical, and it had worked. The cubs slept in a pile around Elena that night. She did not move from her spot on the floor. Her back ached and her legs fell asleep, but she stayed because the cubs needed her to stay. They needed to know that she would still be there when they woke up. In the morning, Elena made breakfast. The cubs followed her to the kitchen door and cried when she went inside without them. She worked as quickly as she could, preparing a simple meal of warm grain and soft fruit. When she returned to the ward, the cubs swarmed around her, their small bodies vibrating with relief. They ate together again. Elena sat in the center and the cubs sat around her. When one cub finished, Elena refilled the bowl. When another cub spilled food on the floor, Elena cleaned it up without frustration. When the smallest cub tried to climb into the pot itself, Elena gently lifted her out and gave her an extra portion. After breakfast, the cubs did something they had not done since arriving on the station. They played. It started slowly. 2 cubs began to wrestle over a spoon. A third cub chased her own tail. Soon all 12 were running and jumping and making sounds that might have been laughter. Elena sat against the wall and watched them with tears in her eyes. She had not saved them yet. They were still orphans. They were still grieving. They would carry the loss of their parents forever. But they were alive. They were eating. They were playing. For now, that was enough. The station's medical system logged a change in the cubs' vital signs. Heart rates normalized. Stress hormones decreased. Growth patterns resumed. The data was clear and undeniable. The cubs were healing, and it had started with a bowl of soup. Days turned into weeks. Elena cooked 3 meals every day for the Varth cubs. She woke before the station's lights brightened and went to the kitchen while most beings were still sleeping. She prepared breakfast and carried it towards 7C. She sat with the cubs while they ate. Then she returned to the kitchen and began preparing lunch. Her life became a rhythm of chopping and stirring and serving. Her hands grew rough from washing pots. Her clothes always smelled like food. She lost weight because she often forgot to eat her own meals while making sure the cubs had enough. She had never been happier. The cubs grew stronger with each passing day. Their silver fur regained its shine. Their amber eyes lost their emptiness and filled with curiosity and mischief. They began to explore the ward, sniffing corners and climbing walls and getting into trouble the way healthy cubs should. They also became very attached to Elena. Wherever she went in the ward, 12 small bodies followed. When she sat down, they piled around her. When she stood up, they grabbed at her legs and whined. The smallest cub, who Elena had started calling Little One in her thoughts, refused to sleep unless she was touching some part of Elena's body. Elena understood their need. She was the only being in their world who made food for them. In their minds, she had become their pack. Losing sight of her must have felt like losing their parents all over again. So she never left them for long. She brought her personal belongings to the ward and slept on the floor with the cubs. She read her books with Little One curled in her lap. She sang songs from Earth while she fed them, not caring that they could not understand the words. Administrator Catherine called her to another meeting. After 3 weeks, Elena came to the office with her hair messy and dark circles under her eyes. She sat in the same too large chair and waited for the Shalari to speak. "The cubs are recovering," Catherine said. It was a statement, not a question. She had access to all the medical data. "Yes, your methods have been effective." "Yes." Catherine's compound eyes shifted in patterns that Elena had learned to recognize as thoughtfulness. "I have studied the footage of your food preparation extensively. I have analyzed the nutritional content of every meal. I have compared your results to the results of our automated systems." Elena waited. "The data makes no sense," Catherine admitted. "Your food is not superior to ours in any measurable way." In some cases, it is inferior. The vitamin content varies. The caloric distribution is inconsistent. The texture is not optimized for Varth digestion. I know. And yet the cubs eat your food eagerly while rejecting ours completely. I have run 17 different analyses, and I cannot explain this discrepancy. Elena smiled. She was tired, but the question made her feel something warm in her chest. May I try to explain it? Please. Elena thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. Catherine was a logical being. She needed to frame this in terms that a logical mind could accept. When your machines make food, they follow perfect recipes. They measure every ingredient exactly. They control every variable. The result is food that is nutritionally complete and physically consistent. Yes, this is correct. But when I make food, I do not follow perfect recipes. I taste as I go. I adjust based on instinct. Sometimes I add more salt because it feels right. Sometimes I cook the vegetables longer because the cubs seem to enjoy them softer last time. The result is food that is nutritionally acceptable but physically inconsistent. Catherine's mandibles clicked. This inconsistency is what I cannot understand. Why would inconsistent food be preferred? Because the inconsistency proves that a person made it. Elena leaned forward. When the cubs taste my soup, they taste the variations. Each batch is slightly different. Each meal is unique. This tells them that someone stood in a kitchen and made choices. Someone tasted and thought and decided. Someone cared enough to pay attention. She paused to let this sink in. Your machines make food that is perfect because they follow rules. I make food that is imperfect because I make choices. And those choices, even when they result in worse nutritional outcomes, communicate something that the cubs desperately need to hear. What do they need to hear? That they are worth the effort. That someone sees them as individuals, not as biological units that need fuel. That even though their parents are gone, there are still beings in the universe who will spend their time caring for them. Catherine was silent for a long moment. Her eyes shifted through dozens of patterns as she processed this information. You are suggesting, she said slowly, that the act of preparation is more important than the product of preparation. I am suggesting that for beings who form social bonds, the act and the product cannot be separated. Food made by loving hands carries love in it. The cubs cannot taste the vitamins, but they can taste the care. Catherine made a sound that might have been a sigh. This is a very inefficient way to operate. Yes, it requires individual attention for each case. It cannot be scaled or automated. It demands time and energy that could be used for other purposes. Yes, it is completely impractical for a station that processes thousands of refugees every cycle. Yes, Catherine looked at Elena for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed. It was a strange sound, clicking and buzzing, but it was unmistakably laughter. Humans are a very strange species, she said. You make everything more difficult than it needs to be. And somehow, your difficulty produces results that our efficiency cannot match. Elena grinned. We call it the human touch. The human touch. Catherine repeated the phrase as if tasting it. I will add this to my reports. Perhaps other stations can learn from your methods. Perhaps. Catherine pulled up a screen and typed rapidly. I am extending your assignment towards 7C indefinitely. You will continue to care for the cubs until a permanent home can be found for them. I am also requesting additional human staff for our refugee processing division. Elena's eyes widened. Really? Your methods may be inefficient, but they are effective. And in the end, effectiveness is what matters most. Catherine looked up from her screen. You have saved 12 lives with soup and patience. That is not a small thing. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She blinked them back and nodded. Thank you, Administrator. Thank you, Elena Vasquez. You have taught me something valuable today. What is that? Catherine's compound eyes glittered. That sometimes the best solution to a problem is not the fastest or the simplest or the most logical. Sometimes the best solution is love, served warm in a bowl. Elena returned to Ward 7C with a full heart. The cubs swarmed around her as soon as she entered, their small bodies vibrating with joy at her return. Little one climbed up her leg and settled in her arms, burying a small silver face in Elena's neck. I am here, Elena whispered. I am here and I am not going anywhere. She carried little one to the kitchen and began preparing dinner. The other cubs gathered at the door and watched, their amber eyes following her every movement. Tonight she would make something special. Tonight she would make the food that her grandmother had made for her on her birthday, long ago on a planet called Earth. The cubs would not understand the meaning of the recipe. They would not know that it was a gift passed down through generations of her family, but they would taste the love in it, and that was enough. 2 months passed on the station. The Vorath cubs grew taller and stronger and more confident. They no longer huddled in corners or refused to eat. They ran through the corridors of Ward 7C like small silver storms, playing games that only they understood and making messes that Elena happily cleaned up. The oldest cub was named Ref. He was 9 in human years, and he had taken on the role of leader among his siblings. He watched over the younger cubs and made sure they did not get into too much trouble. He also appointed himself as Elena's assistant in the kitchen at first. He simply watched her cook. He sat on a high stool that Elena had found for him and followed her movements with intense focus. His ears tracked the sounds of chopping and stirring. His nose analyzed every smell that rose from the pot stot. Then one day he reached out and took a vegetable from the counter. He held it up to Elena with a questioning look. She understood immediately. You want to help? He did not understand her words, but he understood her tone. He nodded eagerly. Elena found a small knife that was safe for his paws. She showed him how to hold it, how to cut the vegetable into pieces, how to keep his fingers away from the blade. He watched with total concentration and then tried to copy her movements. His first cuts were rough and uneven. The pieces were different sizes. Some were too thick and some were too thin. By machine standards, they were completely wrong, but Elena praised him warmly and added the pieces to the pot anyway. Reth's eyes glowed with pride. From that day on, he helped with every meal. He learned to measure ingredients by watching Elena measure. He learned to stir pots by watching Elena stir. He learned to taste and adjust by watching Elena taste and adjust. The other cubs wanted to help too. Elena built small stepping stools so they could reach the counters. She gave them simple tasks like washing vegetables and mixing ingredients. The kitchen filled with chaos and noise and spilled food and more love than it had ever held before. Cooking took 3 times longer with the cubs helping. The meals were messier and more inconsistent than ever. Administrator Catherine watched the footage and made sounds that might have been despair, but the cubs ate every bite with joy, knowing that their own paws had helped make it. Word spread through the station about the human and her unusual methods. Other species came to observe, curious about the small warm blood who had succeeded where machines had failed. Some of them asked questions. Some of them took notes. Some of them simply watched in silence, their alien eyes reflecting thoughts that Elena could not read. A delegation from a Vorath colony arrived at the station after 10 weeks. They had heard about the cubs who survived the Starward Promise, and they had come to offer them a new home. Elena felt her heart crack when she heard the news. The delegation leader was an elderly female named Cora. Her fur was gray with age, and her eyes held the weight of many years. She came to Ward 7C and watched the cubs play for a long time before speaking. "You are the human who saved them," she said to Elena. Her voice was rough but not unkind. "I just made them." "Soup." Cora made a sound that might have been laughter. "You made them more than soup. You made them family again." She looked at Elena with ancient amber eyes. "The young ones speak of you constantly. They call you the warm one who feeds. In our language, this is a title of great honor. It is what we call the heart of a pack." Elena did not know what to say. Her throat felt tight. "We will take the cubs to our colony," Cora continued. "There are many families who wish to adopt them. They will grow up surrounded by their own kind, learning our ways and our language. This is what is best for them." "I know," Elena whispered. "I know it is." Cora studied her for a moment. "You do not want them to go. I want what is best for them, even if it hurts." Cora nodded slowly. "This is the heart of a true caregiver. You give everything you have, and then you let go when letting go is right." She reached out and touched Elena's hand with her paw. "You have given these cubs something precious. You have shown them that love can exist outside their birth pack, that strangers can become family, that the universe, even in its cruelty, still holds warmth." The cubs did not understand what was happening when the day of departure came. They knew that something was different because Elena's eyes were red and her voice was strange. They clustered around her more tightly than usual, sensing her distress without knowing its cause. Elena gathered them together in the center of the ward. She had prepared one final meal for them, the same soup she had made on that first day. The cubs ate it eagerly, their small tongues lapping at the familiar taste. When the bowls were empty, Elena spoke to them. She knew they could not understand most of her words, but she spoke anyway. "You are going to a new home, a good home with others like you. You will learn your own language and your own ways. You will grow up strong and happy." Her voice broke, but she kept going. "But I need you to remember something. No matter where you go, no matter how far away you are, you were loved here. You are loved now. You will always be loved." The cubs watched her with wide amber eyes. Little one climbed into her lap and pressed a small cold nose against Elena's cheek. Reth came forward. He had something in his paws, hidden from view. He held it out to Elena with a serious expression. That it was a small figure, roughly human-shaped. He had made it from nutrient paste, shaping it carefully over many days and letting it dry until it was hard. The details were rough, but the intention was clear. It was Elena. It was a gift. "For you," Reth said in broken Galactic Standard. He had been learning words from the station's translation programs. Love given form. Elena took the small figure and held it against her heart. The tears fell freely now, and she did not try to stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." The cubs piled onto her one last time. They covered her with their small silver bodies, pressing as close as they could get. Elena held them and breathed in their familiar smell and tried to memorize the feeling of their fur against her skin. Then Cora gently called them away. The cubs followed her reluctantly, looking back at Elena with confused and worried eyes. Reth was the last to leave. He stood at the door for a long moment, his amber eyes meeting Elena's dark ones. "We will remember," he said. "Always." Then he was gone. Elena sat alone in the empty ward. The bowls were still on the floor around her. The pot was still warm. Everything smelled like the soup she had made so many times before. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Administrator Catherine standing in the doorway. "You will miss them," the Shalari observed. "Yes." Elena's voice was hoarse from crying. "This is inefficient. Attachment leads to pain." "Yes, it does." Catherine was silent for a moment. Then she did something unexpected. She crossed the room and sat down on the floor beside Elena. It was an awkward position for her long insectoid body, but she managed it. "I have received 17 requests for your help," she said. "Other wards with other children. Different species, but similar problems. Beings who need more than nutrition. Beings who need the human touch." Elena wiped her eyes and looked at the administrator. 17? So far. I expect more will come. Catherine's compound eyes glittered. It seems your inefficiency has become valuable. Many beings want access to it. Despite her grief, Elena felt something warm stir in her chest. "I suppose I should make more soup then." "I suppose you should." Elena looked at the small figure in her hand. Love given form, Reth had called it. A gift made with care and time and attention. A gift that said you matter, and I see you, and I will remember you always. She tucked the figure carefully into her pocket and stood up. Her legs were stiff, and her back ached, and her heart was bruised in places that might never fully heal. But there were 17 more groups of children waiting. 17 more chances to make love visible. 17 more opportunities to show beings from across the galaxy that humans cared. She walked to the kitchen and began to clean the pots. Tomorrow she would start again. Tomorrow she would meet new children and learn their fears and find ways to feed not just their bodies, but their souls. The universe was vast and cold and full of suffering, but it also held warmth. It held kindness. It held humans who made soup for grieving children, even when it made no logical sense. And somewhere across the stars, 12 Vorath cubs were traveling to their new home with full bellies and hopeful hearts, carrying with them the memory of a human who had shown them that love could be given in a bowl. Elena smiled through her tears and started to cook.